The dust devil spun across the salt flats like a demon dancing, and Rebecca Kendrick watched it with eyes that had forgotten how to cry, her feet bleeding through what remained of her leather boots as she stumbled forward into the blinding white wasteland of the Nevada desert. She had been walking for 6 days since the stagecoach broke down somewhere between Carson City and the mining town of Pyramid City, where her brother supposedly waited with a job and a fresh start. The driver had sworn the wheel could be fixed in an hour, but when the Paiute raiders came screaming over the ridge at sunset, everything had gone to hell faster than a match dropped in kerosene. Rebecca had run into the desert with 2 other passengers, a merchant and his wife, but they had turned north toward what they thought was a settlement. Rebecca had kept east, clutching the compass her father gave her before he died, trusting the tiny trembling needle more than the panicked words of strangers. That compass was all she had left now. Her canteen had run dry 2 days ago. The hardtack in her bag was gone. The blisters on her feet had burst and reformed so many times that she could feel bone grinding against the desert floor with every step. Her boots, good Philadelphia leather that had carried her across a continent, were little more than flapping soles held together by memory and stubbornness. She thought about sitting down, just for a moment, just to rest, but she knew if she sat, she would never stand again. The sun hammered down on her bonnet, bleaching everything white and gold and merciless. September in Nevada was supposed to be cooler, but the desert did not care about calendars or the desperate hopes of Eastern women who thought they could survive the West through sheer determination. Rebecca had learned 1,000 lessons in the past week, and most of them involved exactly how fragile the human body really was. She took another step, and the sole of her left boot finally gave up entirely, peeling away like dead skin. She kicked it off without breaking stride, then removed the right boot too, leaving them both behind in the alkali dust. Her stockings lasted another 100 yards before they shredded completely. After that, it was just her bare feet against the earth, and the earth was not kind. But still she walked, because stopping meant dying, and Rebecca Kendrick had not traveled 2,000 miles from Philadelphia to die within spitting distance of her destination. She could see mountains in the distance, purple shadows that wavered in the heat shimmer. Pyramid City was supposed to be nestled at the base of those mountains, built around the silver strikes that drew men west like moths to a flame. Her brother Thomas had written that it was rough and wild but full of opportunity for anyone brave enough to seize it. Rebecca had thought herself brave once. Now she just felt hollow, scooped out and sun-dried like an abandoned gourd. She walked until her shoes were just memories, and then she walked some more. The sun was beginning its slow descent toward the horizon when she heard the sound of hoofbeats. At first she thought it was a hallucination, another trick of the desert that had been tormenting her with visions of water and shade for the past 2 days. But the sound grew louder, more insistent, and when she turned her head she saw him. A lone rider on a bay horse, moving at an easy canter across the hardpan. He was too far away to make out details, just a dark shape against the bright landscape, but he was real. He had to be real. Hallucinations did not kick up that much dust. Rebecca tried to call out, but her throat was so dry that nothing emerged except a papery rasp. She raised her hand instead, waving it in slow mechanical arcs, praying that he would see her against the vastness of the desert floor. The rider changed direction, angling toward her. Relief flooded through her body with such intensity that her knees buckled. She caught herself on shaking arms, palms pressed flat against the hot ground, and waited as the hoofbeats grew closer. The horse slowed to a walk, then stopped a few feet away. She heard the creak of saddle leather as the rider dismounted. Jesus Christ, a man's voice said, rough and low. "Madam, how long have you been out here?" Rebecca lifted her head. The man was tall and lean, weathered by sun and wind until his skin was the color of old saddle leather. He wore a dusty brown hat pushed back on his head, revealing dark hair and eyes that were surprisingly blue in his tanned face. A red bandana was tied around his neck, and his shirt was faded blue with sweat stains under the arms. He looked like every cowboy she had seen since crossing the Mississippi, but his face held something different. Concern, maybe, or horror. 6 days, she managed to whisper. Stage broke down. Raiders came. He was already moving, pulling a canteen from his saddle and kneeling beside her. "Don't drink too fast," he warned, unscrewing the cap. "Just small sips or you will make yourself sick." The water touched her lips and Rebecca forgot every instruction he had given. She grabbed the canteen with both hands and drank in great desperate gulps, feeling the liquid pour down her throat like salvation. He tried to pull it away, but she held on with surprising strength, draining half the contents before he finally wrenched it from her grip. "Damn it, woman," I said slow, he said, but there was no real anger in his voice. He watched her carefully, waiting to see if she would vomit. When she did not, he allowed her another small drink. "What is your name?" "Rebecca Kendrick," she said. Her voice sounded almost human again. "I was going to Pyramid City. My brother is there." "Pyramid City is 10 miles east," the cowboy said. He looked down at her feet and his jaw tightened. "You are not going to make it another mile, let alone 10. Those feet need tending before infection sets in." "I can walk," Rebecca said, trying to stand. Her legs had different ideas. They folded under her like wet paper and she would have fallen on her face if he had not caught her. "No, you cannot," he said firmly. He studied her for a moment, making some kind of calculation, then seemed to come to a decision. "My name is Benjamin Hayes. I work for the Circle H Ranch about 3 miles south of Pyramid City. I am going to put you on my horse and take you to town. Don't argue because you do not have a choice." Rebecca wanted to argue anyway, wanted to assert some kind of independence or dignity, but the truth was he was right. She could not walk another step. Her body had been running on borrowed time and fumes, and the loan had just come due. Benjamin Hayes lifted her as easily as if she weighed nothing, which she probably almost did after 6 days without food. He set her gently on his horse, then swung up behind her, one arm wrapping around her waist to hold her steady. She could feel the solid warmth of his chest against her back, the strength in the arm that kept her from sliding off. It should have felt improper, scandalous even, but she was too tired and hurt to care about propriety. "Hold on," he said quietly, and nudged the horse into a walk. The motion was gentle, but even that small jostling sent pain shooting through Rebecca's abused body. She bit her lip to keep from crying out, tasting blood and salt. Benjamin must have felt her tense because his arm tightened slightly around her waist. "I know it hurts," he said. "But staying out here will hurt worse. Just hang on. We will be in Pyramid City before full dark." Rebecca closed her eyes and focused on breathing, on staying conscious, on not thinking about the fire in her feet or the raw places where the sun had burned through her clothing. The horse moved at a steady pace beneath them, and gradually the pain receded to a dull roar instead of a scream. "Tell me about your brother," Benjamin said after a while. His voice was calm, conversational, and Rebecca realized he was trying to keep her awake. "What is he doing in Pyramid City?" "Thomas is a bookkeeper," she said. "He came west last year to work for one of the mining companies. He wrote that I could find work too, maybe as a teacher or in one of the shops. Philadelphia has nothing left for me anymore." "What happened in Philadelphia?" "My father died," Rebecca said. The words came easier now, maybe because she was too exhausted to guard them. Cholera took him last winter. The house went to pay his debts. I could have stayed with my aunt, but she made it clear I would be a burden. Thomas sent money for the stage fare and said Nevada was full of fresh starts. It is that, Benjamin agreed. Though it is not an easy place, especially not for women alone. I am beginning to understand that. They rode in silence for a while. The sun sank lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and crimson. The temperature began to drop, which should have been a relief, but Rebecca found herself shivering instead. Benjamin noticed and pulled a bedroll from behind the saddle, draping the blanket around her shoulders with one hand while keeping the other on the reins. "Shock," he said. "Your body is finally figuring out what you put it through. Here, wrap up." Rebecca pulled the blanket tighter, grateful for the warmth and the smell of wood smoke and sage that clung to the fabric. She let her head rest back against Benjamin's shoulder, too tired to maintain any pretense of proper distance. If he minded, he did not say so. He just kept the horse moving steadily eastward, toward the mountains that were slowly resolving from purple shadows into actual stone peaks in the gathering twilight. "How did you find me?" Rebecca asked after a while. "Lucky accident," Benjamin said. "I was checking the fence line on the eastern boundary of the ranch, saw something moving on the flats and figured it was worth investigating. We have had problems with rustlers lately." He paused. "When I got close enough to realize it was a person, I thought I was looking at a ghost." "No offense, madam, but you looked more dead than alive." "I felt more dead than alive," Rebecca admitted. "I kept thinking I should stop and rest, but I knew if I did I would never get up again, so I just kept walking, one foot in front of the other. I did not let myself think about how far I still had to go." "That is the only way to survive something like this," Benjamin said. "Break it down into the next step and then the next one. If you think about the whole distance, it will crush you." There was something in his voice that made Rebecca think he was speaking from experience, but she did not have the energy to ask. Instead, she just let herself drift, not quite asleep but not fully conscious either, trusting the man behind her to keep her safe for the last 10 miles. The first lights of Pyramid City appeared as full darkness settled over the desert. The town was bigger than Rebecca had expected, sprawling along the base of the mountains in a loose grid of streets and buildings. Lanterns glowed in windows like fallen stars, and she could hear the faint sound of piano music drifting from what was probably a saloon. The smell of cooking food made her stomach clench with sudden, violent hunger. Benjamin guided the horse down the main street, which was still relatively busy despite the hour. Men stood in clusters outside the saloons and gambling houses, smoking and talking. A few women in bright dresses called out from second-floor windows, their voices honeyed and false. Everyone seemed to stop and stare as they passed, taking in the sight of the rough cowboy and the half-dead woman wrapped in his blanket. "Where is your brother staying?" Benjamin asked. "I do not know," Rebecca admitted. "I have his letters at the boarding house in Carson City, but I left everything behind when we ran from the raiders. I just know he works for the Consolidated Mining Company." "That narrows it down," Benjamin said. "Consolidated owns half the claims in this district. Their office is on Silver Street, but it will be closed now. I am taking you to Doc Morrison first anyway. Those feet need attention before anything else." He turned the horse onto a side street and stopped in front of a small clapboard house with a wooden sign hanging above the door that read, "Morrison Medical Services." Light showed through the curtained windows. Benjamin dismounted and reached up for Rebecca, lifting her down with the same easy strength as before. This time when her feet touched the ground, even the lightest pressure sent agony shooting up her legs. She gasped and would have collapsed if he had not been holding her. "I have got you," he said, and scooped her up in his arms like a child. He carried her up the steps and kicked the door with his boot. "Doc, open up!" The door swung open to reveal a small, wiry man with gray hair and spectacles perched on his nose. He took one look at Rebecca and stepped aside immediately. "Bring her in, bring her in." "What happened?" "Found her walking across the salt flats," Benjamin said, carrying Rebecca through a small waiting room and into what was clearly an examination room. He set her carefully on a padded table. "She says she has been out there for 6 days. No food, no water, walking the whole time. Her feet are torn to hell." Dr. Morrison was already pulling supplies from a cabinet, his movements quick and efficient. 6 days. Young lady, you should be dead. Let me see those feet." Rebecca tried to lift her legs, but her muscles would not cooperate. The doctor gently helped her, positioning her so he could examine her feet properly. When he saw them, he let out a low whistle. "Benjamin, go to my kitchen and pump some water. Fill the basin I've got on the counter. Clean water, not from the horse trough." Benjamin left without argument. Rebecca watched the doctor as he examined her feet, his fingers gentle despite the pain that his touch caused. He was maybe 50 years old, with kind eyes behind his spectacles and the calm demeanor of someone who had seen every kind of injury the West could inflict. "You have got some bad blisters here, and some of them are infected," he said. "But I do not see anything that should require amputation, which is a small miracle. You must have an iron constitution, miss." "Kendrick," Rebecca supplied. "Rebecca Kendrick." "Well, Miss Kendrick, you are either the luckiest or the most stubborn woman I have ever met. Probably both." He looked up as Benjamin returned with the basin of water. "Set it here. Now I need you to go to the store and see if Harry is still there. Tell him I need bandages, carbolic acid, and laudanum. If he is closed up, bang on his door until he answers. Will she be all right?" Benjamin asked, and Rebecca was surprised by the genuine concern in his voice. "She will live," Dr. Morrison said. "But she is going to be here a while. These feet will take weeks to heal properly, and she cannot walk on them in the meantime. Now go on, I need those supplies." Benjamin hesitated for just a moment, his eyes meeting Rebecca's, and then he nodded and left. The room felt emptier without him, which was a strange thought to have about a man she had known for less than 3 hours. Dr. Morrison began cleaning her feet, washing away the blood and dirt with water that stung like liquid fire. Rebecca gripped the edge of the table and focused on breathing through the pain. The doctor worked with practiced efficiency, occasionally murmuring commentary about what he was seeing. "You have got grit, I will give you that," he said. "Most people would have stopped walking days ago. What kept you going, my brother?" Rebecca said through gritted teeth. "And stubbornness, I suppose. My father always said the Kendricks do not know when to quit." "Well, that stubbornness saved your life. Another day out there and the heat or the infections would have finished you." He paused in his work. "What happened to the rest of your stage passengers?" Rebecca told him the story about the broken wheel and the raid and the decision to split up. Dr. Morrison listened while he worked, asking occasional questions. When Benjamin returned with the supplies, the doctor was just finishing washing Rebecca's feet. "Good, you are back," Dr. Morrison said. "Miss Kendrick, this next part is going to hurt considerably. I need to treat these wounds with carbolic acid to fight the infection. It burns like the devil himself, but it works. I can give you laudanum first to help with the pain." "Will it make me sleep?" Rebecca asked. "Probably yes." "Then give it to me. I do not want to be awake for this." The doctor measured out a dose of the bitter-smelling liquid and Rebecca swallowed it without complaint. It tasted vile, like bitter almonds and regret. But within minutes, she could feel a pleasant fog settling over her mind, softening the edges of pain and fear. The last thing she remembered before the laudanum pulled her under was Benjamin's hand gently brushing hair back from her forehead and his voice saying, "You are safe now. Rest." When Rebecca woke, sunlight was streaming through a window she did not recognize. She was lying in a proper bed with clean white sheets, and her feet were wrapped in bandages that smelled faintly medicinal. For a confused moment, she thought she might be back in Philadelphia, that the whole journey west had been some kind of fever dream, but then the pain in her feet reasserted itself, and memory came flooding back. She was in Pyramid City. She had walked across the desert for 6 days and somehow survived. A cowboy named Benjamin Hayes had found her and carried her the last 10 miles to town. The room she was in was small but clean, with whitewashed walls and simple furniture. Through the window she could see other buildings and a slice of bright blue sky. Voices drifted up from somewhere below, too muffled to make out words but present enough to be comforting. The door opened, and a woman came in carrying a tray. She was perhaps 30 years old, with honey-colored hair pinned up in a neat bun and a practical calico dress. She smiled when she saw Rebecca was awake. "Well now, look who decided to rejoin the living," she said, setting the tray on the bedside table. "I am Martha Morrison, the doctor's wife." "How are you feeling, dear?" "Like I walked across the desert barefoot," Rebecca said, then managed a weak smile. "Which I suppose I did." "That you did, and then some. You gave us all quite a scare. Benjamin came by 3 times yesterday checking on you, and your brother practically wore a hole in my floor pacing once we got word to him." "Thomas is here." Rebecca tried to sit up, but Martha gently pushed her back down. "Not at the moment. He is at work, but he said he would be back this afternoon. In the meantime, you need to eat something. Dr. Morrison said you are likely half-starved." The tray held broth, bread, and tea. It was simple food, but it smelled like heaven. Martha helped Rebecca sit up enough to eat, propping pillows behind her back. The first spoonful of broth made Rebecca realize just how hungry she was, and she had to force herself to eat slowly to avoid getting sick. "The cowboy who brought me in," Rebecca said between bites. "Benjamin Hayes." "Is he here?" "He left about an hour ago," Martha said. "Had to get back to his ranch work, but he made me promise to tell you he would check on you again tonight if that is all right." "Of course," Rebecca said, and tried to ignore the little flutter of something in her chest that accompanied the thought of seeing him again. It was gratitude, she told herself. Nothing more than gratitude for a man who had saved her life. The morning passed slowly. Martha brought fresh bandages and helped Dr. Morrison change the dressings on Rebecca's feet. The wounds looked angry and raw, but the doctor seemed satisfied, saying the infection was already starting to respond to treatment. He instructed Rebecca strictly that she was not to put any weight on her feet for at least 2 weeks, possibly longer. "You will need crutches once you are strong enough to get around," he said. "But for now, bed rest is the prescription. Your body has been through a tremendous ordeal, and it needs time to heal." Thomas arrived in the early afternoon, bursting into the room like a storm. He had changed since Rebecca last saw him, grown leaner and more weathered, his face tanned from the desert sun and his hands calloused from work that involved more than just pushing a pen. But his eyes were the same warm brown she remembered, and they were wet with tears when he grabbed her in a fierce hug. "Becca, my God, when the messenger came to the office I thought it was a mistake," he said. "I thought you were not arriving for another week. What happened?" "They said you walked here from the middle of nowhere." Rebecca told him everything, from the broken stage to the raid to the endless walk across the salt flats. Thomas listened with growing horror, occasionally interrupting with curses directed at the stage company, the raiders, and the desert itself. "You could have died," he said when she finished. "You should have died. if that cowboy had not found you. But he did, Rebecca said firmly. I am here, Thomas. I made it. That is what matters. You are not leaving this town ever again, Thomas declared. I do not care if you have to live here until you are 90. No more traveling, no more stages, no more deserts. You are staying right here where I can keep an eye on you. Despite everything, Rebecca found herself laughing. It hurt her chest and made her head swim, but she could not help it. Thomas looked offended for a moment, then started laughing too, and they sat together like that, laughing and crying and holding hands like they had when they were children, and the world was smaller and safer. Thomas stayed until he had to return to work, promising to come back in the evening with her things from the boarding house in Carson City, which apparently had been forwarded to the mining company office. After he left, Rebecca dozed on and off, her body demanding rest even though her mind was restless. She woke to the sound of boots on the stairs and a familiar voice talking to Martha. Her heart did a strange little skip, and she told herself again that it was just gratitude, just natural relief at seeing someone who had helped her. Then Benjamin Hayes walked into the room with his hat in his hands and that concerned look in his blue eyes, and Rebecca realized she was lying to herself. He looked freshly cleaned up, his dark hair still damp, and his shirt changed to a clean gray one that made his eyes look even bluer. There was a moment of awkwardness as he stood in the doorway, as if he were not sure he had a right to be there, but then Rebecca smiled and he stepped inside. Miss Kendrick, he said formally, I wanted to check that you were recovering well. Thanks to you I am, Rebecca said. Dr. Morrison says I will make a full recovery, though I will be off my feet for a while. Please, sit down. You do not have to hover in the doorway like a nervous cat. He pulled up the chair that Thomas had vacated earlier and sat, setting his hat on his knee. Up close and in proper light, Rebecca could see details she had missed before. He was younger than she had first thought, probably not more than 25 or 26. His face was handsome in a rough-hewn way, all strong bones and sun-weathered skin, with a small scar cutting through his left eyebrow. His hands were work-hardened, with calluses on the palms and old rope burns on the fingers. I brought you something, he said, and produced a wrapped bundle from his coat pocket. I figured you lost everything when you ran from those raiders. This is not much, but I thought you might need it. Rebecca unwrapped the bundle to find a simple cotton dress in a pale blue color, a clean chemise, stockings, and a small comb. The dress was clearly new, still smelling faintly of the dry goods store. Her throat tightened with emotion. You did not have to do this, she said. I know. But I wanted to. He shifted in his chair, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. I asked Martha Morrison about sizes and such. I hope it fits. I am sure it will be fine. Thank you, Benjamin, for everything. I would not be alive if not for you. He shook his head. You were doing fine on your own. Another hour or two and you probably would have hit the road to Pyramid City. Another hour and I would have been dead, Rebecca said bluntly. Let us not pretend otherwise. You saved my life and I will not forget that. They looked at each other for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them. Benjamin was the first to look away, clearing his throat. How long are you planning to stay in Pyramid City? He asked. For good, I hope. Thomas says there are teaching positions available, or I might find work in one of the shops. I suppose it depends on how quickly my feet heal and what opportunities present themselves. It is a rough town, Benjamin warned. Lots of miners and cowboys and men without much in the way of civilized behavior, not always the safest place for a single woman. I did not come west expecting safety, Rebecca said. I came for a fresh start. Philadelphia had nothing left for me but memories and closed doors. At least here there are possibilities. That is true enough. He studied her for a moment. You have got courage, I will give you that. Most women would have given up halfway across that desert. What is the alternative? Lay down and die. That does not solve anything. It just ends the story before you find out how it finishes. Benjamin smiled, a real smile that changed his whole face, making him look younger and less careworn. I like that philosophy. Maybe I will borrow it sometime. They talked for another hour, the conversation flowing easily despite the strange circumstances of their meeting. Benjamin told her about working at the Circle H Ranch, which ran cattle and horses in the territory south of Pyramid City. He had been there for 3 years, working his way up from regular ranch hand to something closer to foreman, though the title was not official yet. He had come west from Missouri after the war ended, looking for work and a place that did not carry so many memories of blood and loss. I was at Wilson's Creek, he said quietly. Then Pea Ridge. By the time it was over, I had seen enough fighting to last a lifetime. I wanted somewhere open and empty where I could work with my hands and not have to think about killing. My father fought too, Rebecca said, for the Union. He never talked about it much, but sometimes I would wake up in the night and hear him walking the house, unable to sleep. I think that is part of what made him so sad toward the end. The war took something from him that he never got back. It took something from all of us, Benjamin agreed. But we keep going anyway, one foot in front of the other, like you said. The evening shadows were growing long when Benjamin finally stood to leave, saying he needed to get back to the ranch before full dark. He hesitated at the door, turning back to look at her. "Can I visit you again?" he asked. "Just to check that you are healing properly, of course." "Of course," Rebecca said, matching his formal tone but unable to hide her smile. "I would like that very much." After he left, Martha came in with supper and a knowing look on her face. "That is a good man," she said. "Benjamin Hayes is as decent as they come, not like some of the rough characters we get through here." "He is just being kind," Rebecca said, but even she did not sound convincing. "If you say so, dear," Martha said, and left Rebecca to her dinner and her thoughts. The next 2 weeks passed in a strange, suspended sort of time. Rebecca stayed in the room above Dr. Morrison's office, her world reduced to 4 walls and a window that looked out over Pyramid City. Thomas visited every day, bringing her books and news from the outside world. Martha kept her company during the long afternoons, teaching her about the town and its people, preparing her for life in a mining community that was nothing like the ordered streets of Philadelphia. And Benjamin came by every evening after his work was done, still dusty from the ranch, smelling of horses and sage and the open desert. At first their conversations were careful, polite, 2 people dancing around the edges of something neither quite wanted to name. But gradually the formality dropped away, replaced by something easier and more genuine. He told her about growing up on a farm in Missouri, the youngest of 5 boys, and how the war had scattered his family like seeds on the wind. His oldest brother had died at Shiloh. Another brother had gone to California and never written back. The other 2 had stayed in Missouri to work the family farm, but Benjamin had needed to go farther, to find a place where the land was not soaked in blood and bad memories. Rebecca told him about Philadelphia, about her mother dying when she was young and her father raising her and Thomas alone, about learning to read before she could properly walk, about wanting to be a teacher from the time she was 8 years old and realized that knowledge was power and freedom, about the slow decline after her father got sick, watching him fade day by day until there was nothing left but an empty house and debts they could not pay. "That is why you came west," Benjamin said. "It was not a question." "That is why I came west," Rebecca agreed. "I could have stayed." become some kind of dependent spinster living on my aunt's charity. But that felt like dying slowly. At least out here I have a chance to build something of my own. Even if it means walking barefoot across the desert, even then. On the 15th day, Dr. Morrison declared that Rebecca could try standing with crutches. Her feet were healing well, the infections cleared and the worst of the damage already starting to scar over. She would always have marks from those 6 days in the desert, permanent reminders carved into her flesh, but she would walk again. The first attempt was awkward and painful. Rebecca's legs had grown weak from bed rest and the crutches felt strange and unwieldy under her arms. But she managed to cross the room and back, and the look of fierce triumph on her face made both the doctor and Martha laugh. "You will be running foot races by Christmas," Martha predicted. "I will be happy if I can walk to the privy unassisted," Rebecca said, but she was smiling. That evening when Benjamin arrived, Rebecca was sitting in a chair by the window instead of lying in bed. He stopped in the doorway, his face breaking into a wide smile. "Look at you," he said, "vertical and everything." "Dr. Morrison says I am a model patient," Rebecca said. "Which I suspect is his polite way of saying I am too stubborn to stay down. I believe that." He came in and took his usual seat, though tonight he seemed more energized, almost excited. "I have got some news. I spoke to the foreman at the ranch, and we have got a position available if you want it." Rebecca blinked. "A position? Doing what?" "Teaching," Benjamin said. "The ranch owners have 3 children and they have been looking for someone to provide schooling. The nearest school is here in Pyramid City, and that is too far for the children to travel daily. The position would include room and board in the main house, plus salary. It is not a big operation, nothing like a proper school, but it is teaching work and it is honest." Rebecca's heart was racing. "Benjamin, are you serious?" "Completely serious. I told them about you, about how you came west to teach and how you survived 6 days in the desert through pure determination. Mrs. Hamilton, that is the ranch owner's wife, she was impressed. She wants to meet you once you are well enough to make the trip. When? How soon? Whenever you are ready. There is no rush, but I wanted you to know the opportunity is there if you want it." Rebecca felt tears prickling her eyes and blinked them back furiously. "I want it. God, yes, I want it." "Thank you, Benjamin. Thank you for thinking of me." "It was not hard to think of you," he said softly, and there was something in his voice that made Rebecca's breath catch. "You have been on my mind pretty constantly since I found you on those salt flats." The air in the room suddenly felt charged, full of unspoken possibilities. Rebecca looked at Benjamin, really looked at him, seeing not just the cowboy who had saved her life but the man beneath. Strong and steady and kind, with shadows in his eyes that matched the shadows in her own. "Benjamin," she started, but he held up a hand. "Let me say this before I lose my nerve," he said. "I know we have not known each other long. I know you have got healing to do and plans to make, but I need you to know that finding you out there on the desert, that was not just luck. That was fate or providence or whatever you want to call it. And every time I visit you here, every time we talk, I am more certain that I want to keep knowing you. Not as the woman I rescued, but as yourself. As Rebecca." Rebecca's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst through her ribs. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that I am falling in love with you," Benjamin said, the words coming out in a rush. "And I know that is probably too fast and too much, and you probably think I am insane. But I have spent 3 years in Nevada without feeling much of anything beyond tired and lonely. And then I found you and suddenly everything is different. I can see a future again. I can imagine tomorrow mattering." Rebecca could not speak. She just stared at him, this rough, honest cowboy who had appeared like salvation when she needed it most, and felt something inside her chest crack open and spill warmth through her entire body. "I am falling in love with you too," she whispered. "I thought it was just gratitude, but it is not. It is something more, something bigger. And yes, it is too fast and probably insane, but I do not care. I walked across the desert to get here, Benjamin. I am not going to walk away from this." He crossed the distance between them in 2 strides and took her hands in his, careful of the healing blisters on her palms. His hands were rough and warm and steady, anchoring her to this moment, this feeling, this truth between them. "Then we will figure it out together," he said. "One step at a time." Rebecca laughed, the sound bright and free in the small room. "One step at a time sounds perfect." He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to, but she did not want to. When his lips touched hers, it was gentle and careful, a question more than a declaration. Rebecca answered by kissing him back, her hands coming up to cup his face, feeling the rough stubble on his jaw and the warmth of his skin. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling like fools. "So," Benjamin said, "does this mean you will consider the teaching position?" "Yes," Rebecca said, "on one condition." "What is that?" "You have to promise that if I ever decide to walk across the desert again, you will be there to carry me the last 10 miles. Benjamin laughed, a rich, warm sound that filled the room. "Deal, though I am going to do my best to make sure you never need to walk across the desert again. I will hold you to that." 3 weeks later, Rebecca made the journey to the Circle H ranch sitting in a buckboard driven by Benjamin. Her feet still bandaged, but healing well enough that she could manage short distances with crutches. The ranch was everything Benjamin had described and more, a sprawling operation set against the dramatic backdrop of the Nevada mountains. The main house was large and well kept, with a wide porch and flowering plants in pots that seemed impossible in the desert climate. Mrs. Hamilton was a stout, practical woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a welcoming smile. She interviewed Rebecca for 2 hours, asking about her education and experience, testing her knowledge of mathematics and literature and history. At the end of it, she hired Rebecca on the spot. "You will start after the 1st of the year," she said. "That gives your feet time to fully heal and you time to prepare lesson plans. The children are aged 6, 9, and 11. They are good kids but energetic, so you will need patience." "I've got plenty of that," Rebecca said, thinking of 6 days walking across the desert. "Patience is something I learned recently." She moved into the main house in late November, taking a small room on the 2nd floor with a window that looked out toward the mountains. The Hamiltons treated her well, more like extended family than hired help. The children were indeed energetic but eager to learn, and Rebecca found joy in teaching them that she had not expected. This was not the formal schoolhouse she had imagined in Philadelphia, but it was real and it was hers. Benjamin was there nearly every evening. As one of the senior ranch hands, he ate dinner at the main house with the family, and afterward he and Rebecca would walk slowly around the property while her feet continued to strengthen. They talked about everything and nothing, learning each other's rhythms and habits, the 1,000 small details that make up a life. He kissed her goodnight under the stars, and she went to sleep thinking about the future they were building one careful step at a time. Winter came to Nevada, cold and clear, painting frost on the windows and turning the mountains into white-capped giants. Christmas was celebrated with a feast at the ranch, all the hands and their families gathering in the main house for food and music. Thomas came down from Pyramid City, and Rebecca introduced him properly to Benjamin. The 2 men sized each other up carefully, then seemed to come to some kind of understanding. By the end of the night they were laughing together, and Thomas pulled Rebecca aside to whisper, "I like him. He is solid. And the way he looks at you, Becca, like you hung the moon. I walked across the desert for this, Rebecca said. I am not letting it go. Good, you deserve to be happy. The new year came, 1876, bringing with it a sense of possibility and change. Rebecca's feet had healed completely, the scars fading to thin white lines that only showed when she was barefoot. She could walk and run without pain, though she still carried the memory of those 6 days like a weight in her chest, a reminder of how close she had come to losing everything. In February, on a clear, cold evening with the stars brilliant overhead, Benjamin took her walking away from the ranch buildings, up a small rise that gave a view of the entire valley. He was nervous, she could tell, his hands restless and his words coming in fits and starts. "Rebecca," he finally said, "I am not good with fancy speeches. I am just a cowboy who got lucky enough to be in the right place at the right time. But I love you. I love your strength and your stubbornness and the way you refuse to quit even when everything is stacked against you. I love how you teach those kids with so much patience and joy. I love how you look at the world like it still has good things to offer despite everything you have been through." He dropped to one knee in the dirt, pulling a small box from his pocket. "I do not have much. Just what I have saved from 3 years of ranch work. But I have got this ring, and I have got my heart, and they are both yours if you want them. Will you marry me, Rebecca Kendrick?" The ring was simple, a thin gold band with a small garnet set in the center. It was the most beautiful thing Rebecca had ever seen. "Yes," she said, her voice choked with tears and laughter. "Yes, Benjamin Hayes, I will marry you on one condition." "What is that?" "You have to tell our children the story of how we met. The whole thing, every detail. Because it is our story, and I never want to forget it." Benjamin stood and swept her into his arms, kissing her until she was breathless and dizzy and happier than she had ever been in her life. "Deal," he said. "I will tell it to them and to their children and to anyone else who will listen. The story of how I found the most stubborn woman in Nevada walking barefoot across the desert, and how she changed my entire life." They were married in April in a simple ceremony at the ranch, with Thomas standing as Rebecca's witness and the ranch foreman standing for Benjamin. Mrs. Hamilton decorated the main house with wildflowers gathered from the desert, and half of Pyramid City turned out for the celebration. Dr. Morrison and Martha were there, beaming like proud parents. The Hamilton children served as impromptu attendants, giggling through the entire ceremony. Rebecca wore a dress that Martha had helped her sew, pale cream cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs. Benjamin wore his best shirt and a new hat purchased special for the occasion. When the circuit preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Benjamin kissed her to applause and cheers, and Rebecca felt something inside her settle into place, a puzzle piece clicking home. They spent their wedding night in a small cabin at the edge of the ranch property, one that the Hamiltons had given them as a wedding gift and long-term home. It was rough but sturdy, with a good roof and a stone fireplace, and it was theirs. Rebecca stood in the doorway looking at the simple furniture and clean swept floor and felt a wave of emotion so strong it nearly knocked her down. "What is wrong?" Benjamin asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "Nothing is wrong," Rebecca said. "Everything is right. I am just thinking about how far I have come. 6 months ago I was dying in the desert. Now I am married to you in a home of our own. It feels like a dream." "If it is a dream, I do not want to wake up," Benjamin said, and kissed the side of her neck, making her shiver. That night they lay together in their marriage bed, learning each other in the oldest way, patient and gentle and full of wonder. Afterward, wrapped in blankets and each other's arms, Rebecca traced the scar through Benjamin's eyebrow and asked him how he got it. "Stupid accident when I was 15, he said. "Tried to break a horse that was not ready to be broken, He threw me into a fence post, bled like the devil, but my brothers patched me up. What about these?" He touched the scars on her feet, the thin white lines that marked where the desert had torn her apart. "I walked until my shoes were just memories," Rebecca said softly. "And you carried me the last 10 miles. That is how I got these. They are my reminder that I survived. That I am stronger than I thought." "You are the strongest person I know," Benjamin said seriously. "Man or woman, you have got iron in your spine, Rebecca Hayes." "Rebecca Hayes," she repeated, testing out her new name. "I like the sound of that, good, because you are stuck with it now." She laughed and kissed him, and they made love again as the desert night grew cold outside and the fire burned warm in their little cabin. The years that followed were not always easy. Nevada was a hard land, and ranching was harder work. There were droughts and floods, cattle that sickened and died, seasons when money was tight and the future uncertain. But through it all, Rebecca and Benjamin held onto each other and the life they were building together. Rebecca continued teaching the Hamilton children, and eventually started taking students from some of the other ranches in the area. Her little classroom in the Hamilton house grew and expanded until finally, in 1878, the community built a proper one-room schoolhouse halfway between the Circle H and Pyramid City. Rebecca was the obvious choice for teacher, and she ran that school with firm kindness and high standards for the next decade. Benjamin worked his way up to foreman of the Circle H, then saved enough to buy a small piece of land adjacent to the ranch. They built a larger house there, with 3 bedrooms and a real parlor, dreaming of the family they wanted to fill it with. Their first child was born in the spring of 1879, a boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's stubborn chin. They named him Samuel, after Benjamin's brother who had died in the war. Rebecca labored through the night with Martha Morrison attending her, and when she finally held her son in her arms, she wept with joy and exhaustion and overwhelming love. Benjamin cried too, though he tried to hide it, pressing his face against Rebecca's shoulder as he held them both. "We made a person," he said wonderingly. "A whole entire person." "We did," Rebecca agreed, "and we are going to do our best not to ruin him." Samuel was followed by 2 more children, a daughter named Grace born in 1881, and another son named William who arrived in 1884. The house that had seemed so big was suddenly full of noise and chaos and love. Rebecca balanced teaching with motherhood, sometimes bringing her own children to school with her, letting them learn alongside the rancher's kids. Benjamin taught his sons to ride and rope, passing on the skills he had learned in his years as a cowboy. He taught Grace, too, despite the raised eyebrows of some of the more traditional ranchers, insisting that his daughter would know how to take care of herself in this wild country. Thomas stayed in Pyramid City, eventually becoming head bookkeeper for the Consolidated Mining Company and marrying a widow named Catherine in 1880. He and Rebecca stayed close, visiting often, their children growing up as cousins even though Catherine's daughter from her first marriage was the only one who was not technically family by blood. The years turned into decades. Nevada grew and changed around them, the wild frontier slowly giving way to something more settled and civilized. The railroad came through, bringing with it easier travel and more people. Pyramid City grew from a rough mining town into a proper community with churches and schools and businesses that lasted more than a season. Rebecca and Benjamin grew older together, their faces weathering like the land they lived on, their bodies marked by work and time and life. But the love between them never diminished. If anything, it grew deeper and more certain, rooted in all the experiences they had shared and the life they had built. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Benjamin took Rebecca back to the spot where he had found her on the salt flats. It was a journey they had made a few times over the years, a pilgrimage to the place where their story really began. They stood together looking out at the endless white expanse, so beautiful and so deadly. "You ever think about what would have happened if I had not found you?" Benjamin asked. "Sometimes," Rebecca admitted, "but not the way you might think. I do not dwell on the fear of it, on how close I came to dying. I think about how everything had to happen exactly the way it did for us to end up here. The broken stage wheel, the raiders coming when they did, you deciding to check the fence line that day. All of it had to happen exactly right, or we would never have met. Fate," Benjamin said, "or luck, or God, whatever you want to call it." She leaned against him, his arm automatically coming around her shoulders. "I walked across this desert to find my future. I just did not know that future was you." "I was looking for a lost cow," Benjamin said with a laugh, "and I found the love of my life instead. Best trade I ever made." They stood there for a long time, two people who had survived and endured and built something lasting in a harsh land. The sun moved across the sky, painting the salt flats in shades of gold and amber, and eventually they turned back toward home. Their children grew and had children of their own. Samuel became a rancher like his father, taking over the Circle H when Mr. Hamilton retired. Grace shocked everyone by becoming a doctor, traveling east for medical school, and then returning to Nevada to practice in Pyramid City. William became a teacher like his mother, taking over the one-room schoolhouse when Rebecca finally retired at the age of 55. Rebecca and Benjamin grew into grandparents, their house once again filling with noise and chaos as their children brought the next generation to visit. They told the story of how they met countless times, embellishing certain details and arguing good-naturedly about others, but always agreeing on the important parts. She had walked until her shoes were just memories. He had carried her the last 10 miles. And somehow, impossibly, they had found each other in the middle of the desert and built a life together. In the summer of 1902, when Rebecca was 60 and Benjamin was 62, they sat together on the porch of their house watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold. Their hands were clasped together, fingers intertwined, Rebecca's wedding ring worn thin from 26 years of wear. "You regret it?" Benjamin asked suddenly. "Coming west, giving up the chance at a different life in Philadelphia?" Rebecca looked at him, at the lines around his eyes and the gray in his hair and the strength that still showed in his shoulders despite his age. She thought about their children and grandchildren, about the school she had run for decades, about the 1,000 small moments that had made up their life together. "Not for a single second," she said. "I would walk across that desert barefoot 100 times if it meant ending up here with you." "Good," Benjamin said, "because I would ride out to find you every single time." They sat together as the sun sank below the horizon, two people who had defied the odds and survived the desert and found something more precious than silver or gold. They had found each other, and that had made all the difference. Years later, when both of them had passed into memory and their grandchildren were telling stories to their own children, the tale of Rebecca and Benjamin became a kind of legend in Pyramid City. The woman who walked across the desert and the cowboy who saved her, and the love that grew between them in the harsh Nevada soil. But for those who knew them best, who had seen them together at church services and town gatherings and school events, the real story was not about the dramatic rescue or the unlikely meeting. It was about what came after, about choosing each other every day for more than 4 decades. About building a life together through drought and hardship and joy. About two people who had both been looking for something they could not quite name and who found it in each other. The schoolhouse where Rebecca taught for so many years still stands on the edge of Pyramid City, though it is used for other purposes now. There is a small plaque on the wall commemorating her service to the community, but nothing that tells the real story of how she got there. The Circle H Ranch continued through several generations, eventually being absorbed into a larger operation but keeping the name. Samuel's grandchildren still work the land, raising cattle and horses in the shadow of the same mountains their ancestors knew. But the truest monument to Rebecca and Benjamin is not in buildings or plaques or land holdings. It is in the descendants they left behind, dozens of people who carry their blood and their stories forward into the future. Teachers and doctors and ranchers and miners, all of them connected back to that day in September 1875, when a dying woman stumbled across the salt flats and a cowboy on a bay horse rode out to save her. On clear nights, when the desert is quiet and the stars shine bright overhead, it is easy to imagine them still out there somehow. Rebecca walking with her determined stride, refusing to give up even when everything seemed lost. Benjamin riding through the heat shimmer, following an impulse he could not quite explain to check the fence line one more time. And in that moment when their paths crossed, when fate or luck or providence brought them together in the middle of nowhere, something changed. Two lonely people found each other. Two wounded souls began to heal. Two uncertain futures merged into one story, one life, one love that lasted until death finally parted them in their 80s, within 6 months of each other because neither could bear to be without their other half for long. The desert keeps its secrets and its dead, but sometimes, just sometimes, it gives back something precious. Rebecca Kendrick walked into that desert expecting to die, and instead she found Benjamin Hayes and a reason to live. He carried her the last 10 miles into Pyramid City, but she carried him through all the years that followed, and he carried her right back. That is the real story. Not the dramatic rescue, though that is part of it. Not the hardship and survival, though those shaped them both. The real story is about two people who chose each other every day, who built something lasting in a land that destroyed the weak and careless, who loved each other through all the seasons of life until the very end. And if that is not a story worth telling, worth remembering, worth passing down through generations, then nothing is. The wind blows across the Nevada desert, stirring the sand and sage, erasing footprints and wagon ruts and all evidence of human passage. But some marks go deeper than the surface. Some stories survive longer than the people who lived them. And some loves are strong enough to echo through time, reminding us all that even in the harshest landscape, hope and love can take root and grow. Rebecca walked until her shoes were just memories, and Benjamin carried her the last 10 miles. But together, they walked through 40-plus years of marriage, carrying each other through joy and sorrow, triumph and tragedy, building a legacy that outlasted them both. And in the end, that is all anyone can hope for, to be remembered, to have mattered, to have loved and been loved in return. They had all of that and more, those two desert survivors who found each other when they both needed saving. Their story is done now, complete and whole, a circle closed. But the love they shared continues, passed down through their children and grandchildren, an invisible thread connecting past to future, proving that sometimes the most extraordinary things happen in the most ordinary moments. A cowboy rides across the desert. A woman walks until she can walk no more. Their paths cross at exactly the right moment, and everything changes. That is how love stories work in the Wild West and everywhere else. Two people find each other against impossible odds, and they hold on tight, and they build something beautiful together. Rebecca and Benjamin did exactly that. They found each other in the desert, and they never let go. and they lived, as all the best stories say, happily ever after.